Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, and welcome to Born Social's Presents Approaching Influencer Marketing. I'm Abby, I'm Client Services Director at Born Social, and I will be your host this morning. And before we get going into the good stuff, the stuff you're all here for, I'll just talk us through some house rules before we get going. So firstly, everything this morning will be recorded, so both slides and audio will be sent to you after the session. So please feel free to rewatch or share with anyone that you think would be interested to watch that wasn't able to make it this morning. Secondly, you'll see there's a little Q&A feature just at the bottom of your screen. Please do use this throughout the session. Maybe you've come with some questions in mind, chuck them straight in there, but also hopefully the content that we've got for you this morning will inspire some new questions as well. Go through them, chuck them in throughout the session. I'll be picking them through, and we've got some time for a Q&A at the end where we'll try to get through as many as we possibly can. If we don't answer your question this morning, please feel free to email us on shout@bornsocial.co.uk and we'll get back to you. Or if you've got a more specific question, please feel free to drop us an email as well. So why are we all here? Well, hopefully you're here to hear about influencer marketing. If not, now's a great time to bow out. But I guess the bigger question is kind of why are we here now? So influencer marketing is not new. You know, if you followed Born Social for a while or any other social agency, we've been talking about and delivering influencer marketing for a few years now, but much like a lot of other things, the pandemic caused us to pivot and rethink what that looks like. On one hand, we had, events cancelled and, that desire for an aspirational lifestyle aesthetic definitely didn't feel right or needed anymore. But on the more positive side, brands started to look to influencers to create content that they felt unable to create during lockdown. So this got us thinking, what does that mean? What has the pandemic done to shape the state of play within influencer marketing? And how should we be taking those learnings forward in the strategies that we build? So that's what we're going to go through this morning. And to do that, we've got a fantastic lineup of speakers. So Essie, who is our senior strategist, is going to kick us off with an overview of the industry at the moment, what is going on, and what are the kind of 3 key considerations to make when creating an influencer marketing strategy. She's then going to hand over to Steph Ross, who is our Senior Social Media Manager at Born Social. Steph is going to talk us through some of the key misconceptions within influencer marketing, hopefully debunk some of those myths for you guys, and then also share some examples of what we would consider great influencer marketing work. And then really excitingly, we have Steph Yaboa as a guest speaker with us today. So after those 2 sessions, Steph is going to join our panel. Steph is an author, plus size fashion and lifestyle content creator, as well as a freelance journalist who has written and been featured in Vogue, Elle, GQ, The Guardian, Vice, Stylist, and Grazia. Steph is also a fat acceptance activist who is active within the body positive and body image communities. And with her book Fattily Ever After coming out in September, we could not be more excited to have you on board this morning. So Steph, thank you so much for joining us. And guys, bear in mind that we've got Steph on the panel when thinking about the questions that you want to ask us. So that is quite enough from me. I will now hand over to Essie to kick us off with an overview of the state of play.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Abby. So what I wanted to do is to take a look at where we stand after the pandemic. So what does the influencer industry look like, and have we actually learned anything from being in lockdown? And just a quick disclaimer, when we refer to influencers, when we're talking about, content creators or social creators, we are all referring to that same bucket of people who create social content for their living, really. But just gonna get straight into it. So we all know what the picture looked like pre-corona. So the influencer marketing industry on a global scale was worth around 6.5 billion in 2019. And almost half of marketers spent more than 20% of their budgets on influencer posts. So looking at a relatively big investment globally that is and has been due to increase as well. And the shifts in the influence industry that we've seen since the pandemic started have been really interesting. So, it kind of started off by both brands and influencers panicking about the future. As Abby already referred to, the partnerships that were cancelled, events that were cancelled, and that aspirational lifestyle content that we were so used to seeing from those Instagram lifestyle influencers in particular, suddenly seemed quite inappropriate when we were all in lockdown. So influencers had to kind of pivot their approach, not to appear tone deaf, basically. But I think soon brands started to understand the opportunity that these content creators could provide for them. Because I think from a brand perspective, during the COVID time, brands aimed to remain in the conversation and wanted to remain in the conversation, but kind of avoid being at the very center of it. And influencers provided a great way to do this. Basically, gave brands this human face and a way to produce content in a very difficult time. And there's definitely a couple of things that we've learned over the last 3 months. And I do think that there's a real need to almost redefine what we mean by social influencers or social content creators, and how we view their influence in this post-pandemic world. So I'm going to be approaching this from 3 angles. These are the 3, I guess, key themes that then tend to come up time and time again when we're talking about influencers. So number 1 is effectiveness. So does influencer content actually work? Does it do the job it's meant to do? Does it sell products, or is it just pretty pictures? Number 2 is authenticity. So I think there's been this inauthenticity that's been plaguing the influencer industry for quite a while. Do people still trust them? Is that trust diminishing? And number 3 is creativity. So how can influencers help with content production? How much freedom should brands give them? And how to know who's right for your brand as well. And I'm drawing data and stats from a couple of studies here. One is by Influencer Intelligence in association with eConsultancy, and the other one is a very recent Days Media study that's focusing on the Gen Z demographic in particular. But I'm going to get started with theme number 1, which is effectiveness. And I've used the good old Joe Wicks, UK's favorite body coach, here in the background, because I've recently read an article on the Metro that he's set to make 10 million during the lockdown period. So his PE videos were certainly very, very effective. But when it comes to effectiveness as a whole, I think we're still on this journey to understand how to best prove return on investment when it comes to influencer content. So 84% of marketers agree that being able to demonstrate ROI of influencer marketing is critical for its future. But interestingly, 85% of marketers say that engagement data is the biggest metric of success for influencer marketing, which I think is really interesting when you think about, I guess, the struggle to demonstrate that return on investment, but then measuring the success in engagements, because we all know that engagements on social aren't necessarily the best proxy to measure actual sales results. And yes, while those engagements can prove that resonance or can show that our audience find our content relatable, I think there are far more accurate ways of proving the ROI as well. And we'll go into a little bit more detail on that later in the presentation as well. But overall, during the pandemic, I think what we learned is that as those consumer habits changed, creator habits changed very quickly as well. And I think we started to look at influencers in a slightly more serious light due to how quickly they were able to adapt to this and kind of provide value in this really difficult situation. So whether it was Joe Wicks keeping kids entertained with his PE videos, which were hitting view-through rates of nearly 100% and getting million views per video, or whether it was beauty and lifestyle influencers showing how to do gel nails at home and, you know, sharing those very, very tangible skills. I think we started to look at them in a way that we probably haven't looked at them in a while. I think it forced us to think of the role of influencers more critically. Like, what do we need them to do for our brand in particular? Is it to get people engaged and experience something uplifting with our brand in a very difficult time? Or is it just to sell some leftover stock or product when we really need to shift it? But I think this time really forced us to refocus on that return on investment, really refocused on the objective of why we want to be working with influencers to begin with, which I think can only be beneficial for the industry in the long run. Moving on to theme number 2, which is authenticity. So authenticity and trust have always been important, but I think slightly controversial in the influencer industry. And these guys in the background are just a couple of examples of these brilliant, authentic influencers and social creators with something to say. And we've seen the importance of that grow due to the recent movements like Black Lives Matter over the last few months as well. And I think that's made us turn to people with something genuine to say, people who have a real kind of point of view. And overall, authenticity is crucial for the future of the industry. So 90% of industry respondents say that it's critical for the future of influencer marketing. And the consumer attitudes are very similar as well. So 61% of consumers express a preference for influencers who create this authentic and engaging content. However, I do think there's still a long way to go to get to a point where we can see a really transparent industry. So fake followers still ranks as the #1 concern when it comes to influencer marketing. And when we look at that Gen Z demographic in particular, they believe that 70% of what they see on Instagram is not a true representation of someone's life, which I think is really interesting. It really just shows that there is still a long way to go for both brands and influencers to kind of keep on adding that element of authenticity. And I think COVID reminded us kind of why we worked with content creators to begin with, which is to help tell these, you know, brand stories through their unique lens. And I think we're really now getting to a place where this performative, inauthentic promotional content just no longer flies. Like, this can't be the new normal. We need to get to a point where we are sharing genuine stories by authentic people, and, you know, aligning those with those real brand messages that we got. And I think we need to get to a point where brands, and we're getting to a point where brands start to value the real influence of someone over simply being called an influencer, or, you know, how many followers or engagements they might have on their post. And I think we need to get smarter about how we work with influencers and who we work with as well. You know, who are those people with that genuine passion and talent and that point of view that we can align with our brand values as well. And I do believe that it's the expertise and tangible skills and talents and that point of view that will prevail, and that brands will start to appreciate more in the coming months off the back of this very difficult period that we've just gone through as well. And I'm going to move us on to the last theme, which is creativity. I think it should be one of the key reasons for working with influencers. You know, unleashing their creativity, allowing them to tell those brand stories in a way that we necessarily couldn't. You know, whether it's styling Crocs with a tutu or showing your top 4 summer outfits for ASOS, like the guys do here in the background. Because really the content creators are far better and far more creative at translating those brand messages into something that resonates. And 100% of marketers agree that relevance is the most sought after attribute when it comes to influencers as a whole. And what COVID reminded us of is that influencers can also bring that creativity into content production. So this is a brand called MeUndies, who basically shifted from providing product content to actually giving all of that product to influencers and then expressing the product and brand in their own way, which resulted in some amazing content, as you can see here. And I think it's really those close relationships with influencers that can help brands to continue deliver that high quality high quality content in a way that's much more creative. And what we also saw was influencers pivot their approach quite creatively, as we referred to early on as well. So this is Judy here in the background. She's a London-based micro-influencer, and she kind of pivoted from brunching with her friends and talking about her dinners in restaurants to making your own oat milk, and talking about how to avoid food waste when you're cooking, and talking about sustainability as a whole. And I think it's just illustrates that influencers, just like normal people, have multiple interests and passion points that they can bring to life in a very creative manner. And I think it's a really important point when we think about the Gen Z demographic in particular, and their kind of fluid identities. You know, they are not consumed by one particular interest. You know, you can be into fashion, but you can spend all of your evenings gaming, for example. That one interest no longer defines you. And I think that's why brands should be more creative with their choice of influencers as well, whether it's looking across multiple verticals or interest groups. There's so many people with such incredible interests, and I think brands should be a little bit more creative with that as well. But what I think creativity really boils down to is understanding the power of these diverse interests, because there are so many unique voices with different points of views, and it really is the brand's responsibility to seek them out and represent them. And whether it comes down to race or gender or sexual orientation or just a niche interest group, again, I think it is the brand's responsibility to bring those out and partner with those people, because at the end, I do believe that creativity does equal to that representation and hearing those diverse voices and those different points of views as well. So just to summarize quickly, those are the three kind of shifts that we've experienced over the last few months. So number one is that this period has kind of allowed us to refocus on the ROI, refocus on what we really want to get from those influencer partnerships, why we're really working with them in the first place. Number two is appreciating this influence, just over influencers. So understanding, you know, who we work with, why we're working with them, and who can they influence. And number three is around creativity and how it equals representation, and how it really is the brand's responsibility to seek out those voices that can be so powerful and so creative in a way that we haven't necessarily done before. So that is kind of a whistle-stop tour of what we think has changed over the last couple of months when it comes to the influencer industry as a whole. There's still a kind of a huge number of misconceptions that we hear on a daily basis when talking to different brands, that are still very prevalent within each of those three areas. So I wanted to spend a bit of time debunking them with a couple of case studies and examples. So I'm going to hand over to Steph Ross, who will be taking you through these ones.
Perfect. Thanks, Essie. So let's dive straight in and start with effectiveness. With misconception number one, there's no clear way to measure conversion from influencer content. So as Essie mentioned earlier, 85% of marketers are looking at engagement data as the measure of success for their campaigns. And yes, while there absolutely are learnings to take from things like community analysis, for example, there's no correlation between likes on a post and number of sales. So clearly there is some learning to do on how influencers can effectively drive ROI and also how to measure this. So one of the reasons why this will be difficult to work out is because there will be different methods dependent on the different types of businesses that you have. So I've broken this down into three options for today, looking at affiliate links, media, and sales data. So let's start with affiliate links. So what are these? If you're an e-com business, you can give an influencer a bespoke link, and basically what that means is if they put it in their Instagram story and someone swipes up and purchases that product as a result, in the back end of your website, you'll be able to see exactly who that came from. And this is really popular now. You'll probably see it from influencers all the time on their Instagram stories, often in highlights as well, with names such as links, shopping, recommendations. And it's really popular, firstly for brands, because you can see exactly which influencers are driving the most value for you. but also for the influencer as well, because it incentivizes them to make that recommendation, because the more product they sell, the better profit share that they get. And an example of this, which I think is really a good case of effectiveness, is actually from our panelist, Steph. So Steph was experiencing trouble with her water pressure at home and bought a new shower head to soften the water and increase water pressure. This wasn't an ad, it was merely a recommendation, but the result from this was absolutely amazing. And what actually happened was Steph's DMs became flooded with people sharing that they had actually gone out and got this as a result of her recommendation. And so many came through that the brand actually ended up getting in touch to offer her an affiliate link. So absolutely love that. Like, it clearly shows that they were getting value from that recommendation. So secondly, looking at media, I think one thing that brands tend to overlook is how influencers and media can work together to drive the best results. So a few years ago, Instagram introduced the paid partnership tool, which you can see here. You can see transparently at the top that the influencer is working with the brand and it's been paid for. But the real value of this for brands is that they can get access to the insights in-app, as well as being able to boost it to reach a wider audience. A development this year, which I'm personally really excited about, is that you will be able to boost this now and optimize it directly for conversion. So what that looks like when it becomes a branded ad is here. So on the left, you can see Tanya Burr's partnership with Spotlight Oral Care. She posted the recommendation on her IGTV. And then when the brand has gone and boosted that, it's become a shoppable ad. So what this ultimately means is that they will be able to go into the back end and measure return on advertising spend in the same way that they would do with their paid social campaigns, which is really exciting because it also means you'll be able to compare the effectiveness of the two. And moving on to number 3. So I know the first two are specifically e-com examples. So what if you don't have a website? Well, this example should hopefully give an idea of how you can measure impact with that one. So this is an example of a campaign we did last year with our client Veet. So they launched their dermaplaning product, and we were tasked with two things. Firstly, we had to drive mass awareness that the product existed to start with, but we also knew that there was going to be a lot of education to do, given that dermaplaning isn't really a well-known skincare treatment. So we worked with 55 UK influencers to show the product in use, but also to debunk any myths that are attached to dermaplaning. And this ran in conjunction with a branded media campaign, which we ran, which you can see here on the right. So how did we measure the effectiveness of this? So we luckily had access to Veet's retailer sales data, which allowed us to monitor and identify any key peaks in sales, which we could attribute to our activity. And that's exactly what we saw. So not only did we see a peak from the start of our media campaign, but there was a clear second spike following the second wave of influencer activity, which was as a result of working with our largest and most established influencers. But also in addition to this, we could see the social proof coming through pretty clearly. Firstly, in the comments, such as the one on the right here, which is clearly indicating purchase intent, but then there's clear evidence like the photo on the left, which is a consumer tagging in one of our influencers post-purchase and thanking her for the recommendation, so similar to the Steph example. So whilst Veet don't sell their products online, having access to their retailer sales data alongside social proof, this was a pretty good indication that the campaign was a success. So that takes me on to misconception number 2, that lifestyle influencers make really nice content but won't sell product. And the emphasis here is really on the lifestyle influencers. And something that is really influencing this now is there's a load of articles, debate and discussion about what makes an effective influencer. People are hyper aware that it exists now, and people won't blindly trust recommendations made by influencers anymore. And rightly so. But it feels like this is really starting to threaten the reputation of the lifestyle influencer. It feels like no one's really questioning the value of your specialists. And if you're working with someone who is an expert in your industry and product, that recommendation is unlikely to fall flat. So what does that mean for your lifestyle blogger? These are the influencers who are posting more of the everyday aspects of their lives, whether it's their favorite brunch spot to what they're getting up to with their family on a Sunday afternoon. And naturally, these influencers are more likely to work with more brands, given their lack of specialism, and they're going to have a more diverse portfolio of partnerships. So can they be trusted? And the answer is, if you're working with the right ones, then yes, absolutely. I think what's really interesting about your lifestyle blogger is that your audience follow them for who they are, not because of the knowledge in a particular area. And after following these people for a while, you start to follow their lifestyle as if they're someone that you know things about their lives and their family, and it gives this sense of intimacy with someone that you haven't even met. And if you engage with them and they respond to that, well, that strengthens that feeling even further. It's having a relationship with the influencer. So what does this mean for effectiveness? So last year we worked with our client Valspar to launch their Love Your Colour guarantee in 2019. Valspar totally appreciate painting your home is a big decision, and it's also really personal. That choice of colour says a lot about who you are when people come into your home. So that's where the idea for the guarantee came from. It basically means if you don't like the colour that you chose, no stress, you can get another one for no additional cost. And with Mother's Day coming right around the corner, we thought, what is a more personal colour decision than your son or daughter's bedroom? So we worked with a selection of mummy bloggers, and they all had a space that they were able to paint, so whether they were homeowners or renters, but they weren't necessarily interior specialists. And what we asked them to do was take their audience through this process of choosing the colours straight through to the process of painting it, and then the final result as well. And their followers, despite not knowing them personally, they all would have known their children by name and aspects of their lives, and going through this process was really rewarding for both the influencer and their audience. And it's something that they could experience together. And this feels like a product recommendation which is going to resonate far more than an interior specialist who knows everything and anything about interior design and paint without that same personal story. So that takes me on to section number 2, authenticity. Starting with misconception number 3, using hashtag ad or disclaimers is detriment to performance. And I really get this one. I think when it was first introduced, it was a huge topic of discussion. Why should you believe a recommendation if that person's been paid to make it? And I think influencers themselves are still trying to navigate this one. Like, of course, their personal value is important, but is it off-putting if they work with too many brands? Will their audience think they're a sellout? And they're wondering this so much so that they're actually starting to ask their audience this very question. And the good news of this is that people are not put off, that the response is positive. Both of these questions came from 2 very different types of influencer, one a cleaning expert and one fashion, but the turnout was more or less the same, which is great to see for starters. But I think this is where the actual person and their selection of brands that they work with is critical. So the example above is an influencer named Venetia Lamanna. She's a climate activist, and since personally following her, my knowledge of climate change and sustainability has increased dramatically. I know she's a vegan, and I know she's a huge advocate for taking care of the clothes you already own and loving them forever rather than buying new. So when I saw her partner with eCover, who are a vegan and sustainable laundry detergent, yes, I can clearly see it's paid for at the top, but if you read the copy, this is aligned with what she talks about on her channels every single day. So if a partnership is true to a creator's value, having hashtag ad on there should not deter from that effectiveness. So I just want to quickly jump back to the Valspar campaign, because I think this is a great example of this too. This campaign for the influencers was clearly not as simple as just being paid to create content. Firstly, they had to paint their homes with the product, and not only is this a lot of work, but quite frankly, you're not going to paint your home with a paint that you don't like. So it brings me on to misconception number 4, influencers promote an unrealistic lifestyle. This one is interesting because I don't wholly disagree with it, and there are definitely clear examples where influencers have done this. So I'm sure everyone is familiar with this example. Scarlett London last year posted this, and it features a pristine setup, balloons in the background, strawberries on the bed, but then a strangely placed bottle of Listerine in the corner, which she actually happened to be advertising, and pancakes on her bed, which turned out to be tortilla wraps. So this went down pretty badly, and it's not surprising. I mean, aside from the completely unrealistic breakfast setup, who keeps Listerine by their bed? And what is the relevance to this photo and the product? And I think this is where there's starting to be a real shift in what is wanted and expected from influencers. Photos like the above were hugely celebrated on Instagram a few years back. I'm sure everyone can remember. This completely over-the-top aesthetic, this aspiration, unachievable. This is what people enjoyed engaging with. And I think to a degree, there's definitely still a space for it. It's clear that Tara Milk Tea, who's the influencer that created this, is a talented content creator. There's no doubt about that. But it feels like this content is not what people want to see anymore. And I think it's worth noting there's a visible difference in creators exploring being truly creative versus creating a narrative which is false, like Scarlett's ad for Listerine. So looking at some influencers who are on the rise today, this is Rianne. She's a Dutch influencer, and her audience size has literally doubled in the space of 3 months, having hit 1 million followers as of late. And on first look, what is unique about her? She's a lifestyle influencer who posts aesthetically pleasing photos of her in nice outfits. Nice, cool. But that's not the reason that she grew. This is. If you look through her content, while she has the glossy photos, she consistently shows the reality to that, and that has been really celebrated by her audience. And what I found fascinating is I was watching her stories the other day, and she was sharing the results of her affiliate marketing campaign with Naked Fashion. And one story was her in a dress looking poised and Instagram ready, and the second was her in the same dress but looking unfiltered and almost comical. And you know what I'm going to say, the natural one drove the most traffic. And I think that says it all, that audiences now place far more value in authenticity and realness of influencers rather than what was expected on Instagram a few years ago. And I think this is where platforms like TikTok start to become really relevant, as it's all about embracing who you are without the need for filters and face tuning. That takes us on to our final section, creativity. With misconception number 5, influencers must follow a script to get clear branded messaging across. This one can be really tempting. If you're paying an influencer to speak about your brand or your product on your behalf, you're placing a lot of trust that they're going to sell it correctly. But this can be quite dangerous. And yes, you should absolutely brief them in and so that they understand your key USPs. But the result of speaking in a brand's voice rather than their own has a real risk of it not feeling authentic to them. So let's not forget these classic examples of this going on. And I know this is an extreme, but it highlights the difference between working with a credible influencer and someone who will flog product. So we know there's a risk of copying and pasting content, but what happens when you just let them speak about the products themselves in their own words? So this is an example from Nando's, which I absolutely love. So they worked with a popular TikTok creator called Patrick, and he used the green screen feature to chat through his favorite orders at Nando's. And if you listen to it, there's just absolutely no way that a Brad could have written this on his behalf. It's leaning into his true personality, and it's really good. It's funny. And whilst it won't talk about Nando's quality ingredients, it perfectly leans into the culture that Nando's wants to get into. And as a result of that, that's going to drive brand resonance. And on to our final misconception, the process should be quick and transactional. One thing we talk about at Born all the time, and I'm sure similar in all of your businesses, is the importance of a strong creative brief. All great work comes from a great brief, right? So I can totally understand the misconception that if you're pouring your heart and soul into a clear creative brief to share with the influencer, this should be a quick and easy process. But what's really important to recognise is that if you're working with the right influencers, they are creators too. And this should absolutely be a collaboration. If influencers are coming back to build on that brief, to question it or give feedback, this isn't a sign that they're difficult to work with, but it shows that they're really invested in the partnership and want to make sure it's a strong fit for their profile. And I think this is a really nice example of this. So Valspar came to us earlier this year, having recognised that the names of their paint shades were really outdated. International Women's Day was soon approaching, but how could they celebrate women when their colours reflected outdated stereotypes which were far from empowering? Well, that's what was really exciting about this, was that Valspar wanted to give their community the chance to change this and choose the names of the colour chips instead. So together with Valspar, we worked with 3 influencers, the lovely Steph being one of them, who all use their platforms to discuss topics such as female empowerment and feminism. And whilst, yes, we did give them direction in that we wanted them to talk about their experience of the colour pink and what it meant to them, we obviously could not write that on their behalf. And as a result of this, what came from it was true creativity. Let's take this example on the left from Scarlett Curtis, which is incorporating herself into one of Valspar's colour chips. If we'd been so restricted in that brief, we would have never given her the opportunity to come back with this truly amazing piece of work. And I think it will be easy to spot which influencers are indeed creators. I think there's definitely a difference in those who simply review product to those who can create content like this. And in order to let them do their best work, this process is not a mere transaction. It's a collaboration. It's allowing them to lean into their creativity, to show their personal interpretation of your brand message. And I'm absolutely obsessed with this example on the right. It's a TikTok partnership between Zach King and Kind Snacks. It's just so brilliant and clever. And it only would have happened by Kind allowing Zach to explore what their brief meant personally to him. An automated way of working just wouldn't have allowed this. So there you have it. Those are all of our misconceptions, hopefully debunked by now. Totally aware this is only a few of them. So if you guys have any more that you want to share, please do share in the chat or the Q&A below. And if we have time, we can chat through them at the end. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Steph and Essie. So we will now be moving into our panel part of our session this morning, and would love, also for the purpose of this, we've obviously got two Stephs on the call. So Steph from Born Social has now been rebranded to her full name, Steph Ross, for the purpose of the next 15 to 20 minutes. But Steph, would love for you to kick us off, I guess, with an overview, giving the audience a better rundown of kind of your experience up until this point, and I guess particularly how things have feel like they've shifted as an influencer in that space over the last few months.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the presentation, guys. That was so enlightening for me as well as an influencer, sort of looking at all of those stats and everything like that. So yeah, my name is Stephanie and I have been a content creator for 11 years, only recently going freelance within the last year and a half or so. So I started during a time where there was literally, it must have been like Zoella and maybe two other YouTubers at the time. It was very early on where there was literally nobody was blogger.com to host their blogs, and so it was quite a pure time back then because everybody was just writing about the things that they genuinely liked and enjoyed and their hobbies that they pursued and all of these things. And so my blog specifically was predominantly about beauty and fashion when I first started. And in 2014, I started doing a lot more plus size fashion. And with that, I started exploring more in-depth writing, so personal thoughts and think pieces and essays regarding things such as body image, confidence, mental health, all of these things that I was trying to, that I was dealing with and processing at the same time. For me, being a writer, it's always been great for me to sort of using writing to kind of process things that I'm feeling. And I thought, well, why not that people get and just kind of realistic, I think. So to kind of have the deeper thoughts alongside some of the fashion and beauty and skincare and lifestyle and all of those kinds of things. And I think it's a subject that I've been able to navigate quite easily, sort of flitting between the two. So yes, while I was doing my influencing, I was also writing freelance outside of that as well for newspapers and magazines. And these were predominantly opinion pieces, again, talking about the body positivity movement and confidence and self-love and all of these things. And I was also working in marketing agencies as well, and I also worked for influencer marketing for about a year before I went freelance. So I went freelance in 2018, and ever since then it's kind of my feed and my engagement has kind of gone from strength to strength. And it's been very interesting watching the community change over the years from something that was very pure and wholesome and people naturally sharing things that they liked to incorporating brandships and brand deals and collaborations. What I noticed as an influencer was sort of between 2014 and 2018, it was very corporate in terms of influencers and how they portrayed their content. Everybody was trying to get the attention of brands, and so in they felt they had to in a specific way. So whether it was being positive all the time or always posing next to flowers and thorns and always saying things like, oh, I'm obsessed with this or I'm obsessed with that. And there was this very Stepford wife-ish thing that I noticed. Like I didn't feel like people could be their authentic selves for fear of maybe upsetting a brand or not aligning with the brand's values. But what I've noticed over the past couple of years that with the introduction of loads of social justice issues that we've currently been going through, like Black Lives Matter, and I do believe that audiences now are really taking into account authenticity and influencers being genuine as well. So there has been a bit of a surge on influencers trying to be as authentic, as unfiltered to a degree, and as raw as possible in regards to their views and their points on everything from politics to social justice to body image issues. And so that's something that I've always felt like I've had running as a theme with I think what sets me apart as an influencer is that I've always stayed true to me and being very genuine and raw. And I've never been call out a brand if I think what they're doing is in some ways wrong, or if I don't feel like it's a good fit for me, I will always say something, because I think at the end of the day, I also use Instagram as an observer. So I also follow lots of influencers, and I don't want to be seeing something that isn't genuine. And so I always try to stay true to the sorts of brands that I use, whether they fit in with my ethos, whether it would be a natural fit for me. And so, yeah, with the rise in the current news cycle regarding Black Lives Matter, what I found is that my reach increased, like tremendously over last month, by about 100,000 or so. Wow. Just because I was doing a lot of talking about Black Lives Matter. I was doing a lot of educating and providing information to people who wanted to know more about the movement. And I think that's what happened with a lot of Black creators specifically as well. We found that our following has increased tenfold because people want to know, they want the knowledge. I think people are looking for more than just what you're wearing or what you're eating or what you're putting on your face. I think people want to know the human being behind the account and their thoughts and their feelings. So yeah, that's me
fantastic.
in a nutshell.
No, that was amazing. Literally, I mean, a whole host of experience that I know, almost touching on so many different elements, both from an influencer, from marketing, etc. I think I'd love to go into this authenticity piece a little bit more, I guess, and get your thoughts also, Essie, on, I guess, how do you as a brand, you've got the intention around authenticity, how do you find the right people that are authentically aligned with your messaging and your values?
I think the first step to take is really ensuring that you do know what those brand values are. Does everyone in your business know what your brand stands for? And then, I think it still can be a very manual process of getting to know content creators, getting to know influencers, and starting the conversation with them, and, talking to them about the sort of brief that you're looking at. What would you like them to do? What are the messages that you would like to amplify from a brand perspective? And then take them to the influencer and kind of let them recreate them in their own voice. And I think that's just really important, as Steph mentioned earlier, and as well, I don't think it should be it's not always a super quick transactional process where we're like, okay, we want you to say this and post that. It's all about the beauty of working with content creators is letting them use that creativity and translate that brand message in a way that's so interesting. So yeah, it's still quite a manual, potentially quite a long process sometimes to establish these relationships and then nurture them after that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really good point around like the speed. Almost there isn't, we often get asked like, is there a quicker way to do this? And there are absolutely tools and softwares to use, but I think almost nothing quite beats the communication and the collaboration, and that's what we found as well. Steph, would love to hear your thoughts on I guess an example of a campaign or a brand partnership that you've done that you felt was really collaborative, and how that process kind of played out over that partnership.
Yeah, sure. So what I found for me is that the best collaborations that I tend to do are normally with brands whose products or services I already use. So for me, I find it's very natural to talk about the product and integrate it into my everyday content, whether it's a grid or whether it's via Instagram, IG stories. So one brand, oh, there's quite a few actually. So one I could say is Dove. Dove have normally they tend to do a lot of content regarding helping younger students. They talk a lot about the media and how important it is for there to be more diversity. And because these are along the lines of what I already talk about all the time, it just felt like a natural fit for me to collaborate with them, because what I tend to do is on my grid, I'm not a fan of doing short, snappy captions. I actually like to write quite a lot of quite a heavy content in the caption. I always try to make my captions quite deep and just like you know, I want to have the audience leave with something after they finish looking at both the image and also the captions. I also like to have like a bit of advice in there. So partnering with Dove for me just felt effortless, because you know, it almost got to a point where they didn't really need to tell me what to say, because we aligned so succinctly that I could just talk about things such as self-esteem and, you know, not photoshopping, and the fact that there needs to be more diversity within the media and beauty products. And so because of that, we have an ongoing collaboration, and I'm one of their ambassadors, just because our thoughts kind of align. They have the same kind of when it comes to my ethos, I think we match quite well, and so it's, for me, it's enthusiastic to work with them. Another example is Vodafone. So I have done some work, quite a bit of work with Vodafone on some ongoing collaborations, and again, to me, that was very easy to complete because I'm already a Vodafone customer, and actually due to some of the campaigns that I was doing with them, it's like I almost influenced myself, because I started like taking out some of the plans that they had as well, and some of the internet plans. I was like, oh, actually they do this, well, let me change to this. So those were really easy. Yeah, those were really easy to kind of integrate as well. I've also done quite a few collaborations with like dating app brands. So I've worked with Bumble a few times, and with that, because they're so focused on female empowerment, and I have spoken to them behind the scenes on like issues that I've had with the app, like before working with them, it's seamless. People
Really
tend to chat
nice.
about, specifically on my IG stories as well. I think a lot of brands are really taking a lot of weight with Instagram stories, because that's where influencers are showing more of themselves and more of their personality, as opposed to the grid, which you can still do on the grid. But I think IG stories is where a lot of us tend to shine, because that's where you see the most authenticity. So anytime I'm doing a collaboration, I really love doing IG stories, because I feel that's where I can just seamlessly talk about the service or the product.
I love that. I really love your point around copy. So when you're looking at influencers and selecting people to work with, it's not just the aesthetic, it's let's look at the copy. And then that brings me really nicely onto a question for Steph Ross around how brands should be considering or adapting who they work with or how they work with, and how they measure that based on the platform. So is it different working on your Instagram feed to IGTV to Twitter, for example? Like, what are those considerations that we should be making there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one that comes up a lot, is you've chosen the person that you want to work with, and so you're so excited about that, but then when you're thinking about the brief that you've written, have you considered where that person's strengths lie? So I think if you're looking at examples of like the one I shared from Kind Snacks on TikTok, where that is truly playing into the creative strength, he's been asked to create something from scratch, which is like embodying this theme, and it's got humor. But if you'd asked him to do a long form post on Instagram with his thoughts on the snacks and what they tasted like, that would have been a real mismatch. So I think it's really important that firstly you're thinking about what do you want to get out of the campaign firstly, and then when you're looking at your influencer, looking at, well, is my brief actually aligned with who they are and what they speak about? And that's where the Valspar examples are really powerful. So when we were looking at, we knew we wanted to give our communities the opportunity to change the colours, but that needed to come from people who truly believed in that. So that's actually like one of the considerations when we looked at Steph, is that she does use that long form copy, and talks truly about her personal experiences. Someone just saying, Valspar are changing their colours, look at my stories to find out more, would not have had the emotional level that we wanted to have with it, which is really important to Valspar. So I think, there is a lot of intrigue about platforms like TikTok and wanting to try new things, but it's not going to work if you're just trying to do it for the sake of it. It's back to that like transactional point. These things take time, but the result of it, if you get it right, is that it really works.
Great. And that actually feeds in nicely to my next question, but also a lot of questions that are coming through around that I'm going to throw to you, Essie. Age-old question: how do you decide how big of an influencer you work with? This question around macro versus micro influencers, like what is more valuable to a campaign? How do you make that decision, and what are the most important considerations?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I think, again, it comes back to understanding what is the overarching objective, what is it that you are trying to get out of the campaign, and working with the influencer. If it's a pure reach campaign, for example, an awareness campaign, you just want to make sure that your message gets out there. Maybe working with a celebrity or an influencer with 200k million plus followers is the right way to go. If you want to build emotional impact with a particular community, for example, then this is more about finding those influencers who care about that community and who have that influence over those people. So maybe it's about going with some nano influencers who might have 2,000 followers, but every one of those 2,000 followers really listens to their recommendations. So I think it's, again, going back to what is the objective that we want to achieve here. And then there are, pros and cons for larger influencers, pros and cons for smaller ones as well. Again, it does depend on the platform that you choose as well, as Steph was saying. So for example, on TikTok, the algorithm works quite differently in comparison to Instagram, for example, so that even if the influencer on TikTok has loads of followers, the impact that has on the visibility of the content piece isn't as large, or isn't as I guess impactful as it is on Instagram. So on TikTok, you want to go for those people who are able to produce that really entertaining, engaging content that gets to that For You page when you first open the app, versus on Instagram, where building that loyal following and that community is much more important from the algorithm perspective as well.
Awesome, thanks. And I think one of the questions that comes out of that question around who do I pick, large or small, is often synonymous with this question around what can I afford, and then brings me nicely on to Steph, who's going to give us an inside scoop or her experience of how, as an influencer, you determine those rates of what we're charging brands, and how does that process work from an influencer's perspective, Steph?
Well, I'm signed. I am with a talent management agency who are able to determine the fees now, which has been a bit of I think that was like one of the main things that was, it just gave me a lot of mind before then. Oh, do you know what? It's so difficult to determine what your worth is, because I think as influencers, and especially I think sometimes with women influencers, I think sometimes we undercut ourselves a lot, or there can be like this imposter syndrome because there are loads of influencers in a small space and everybody's trying to work with this brand and that brand. And so that can lead to comparisons and people feeling like, oh, maybe I just like undercut myself. And one of the main issues, I think, when it comes to the subject of payment is nobody speaks about it. There are no laws, there are no codes, there's no graphs, there's nothing for influencers to kind of weigh themselves against. So what we found is that when we are approached by brands and they give fee, a lot of people tend to just go by the fee that they were given, and then they set that as their rate. I think especially as micro influencers. So when we first started out, a lot of us were like, how much do we charge for a blog post, or how much do we charge for one Instagram post and one story? I think there can be a lot of confusion regarding that, because there are no guidelines for us to kind of weigh up how much we're worth. I think for me, because I also do writing, and I think with journalism there is a bit of a rate. So for instance, it's like 5p per word, or whatever the case may be. I just started before I went with the talent agency, I started using the rates that I would see within journalism and attaching that to content. But there would be times when I genuinely think it was a case where influencers would literally just have to form like little bubbles or like groups, or on Facebook you find that there are loads of influencer groups where the main question is, how much do I charge for a post? It's still such a grey area. Those who are absolutely no idea, and so we find is that they will normally go with whatever the brand has asked. So for instance, there is a great new Instagram account which is Instagram Pay. It's an Instagram account where influencers upload how much they've been paid by a brand, and so they put it onto their Instagram grid, so I can see, oh gosh, this paid this for this. And it's been so eye-opening, because you see influencers who have 200, 300, 400k being offered £50 for a blog post, or £50 for one Instagram, and it's just like, that's very low. Crazy. But then what would be considered normal? And so I definitely think there needs to be guidelines in place that can tell influencers like how much, you should get paid per post. I know that some influencers who also work within influencer marketing have kindly provided graphs and grids that say, if you're a micro influencer and you have up to 10,000 followers, charging, I don't know, £200 or £150 for a blog for an Instagram post. If you have between 10 to 20 or 25k, charge, £300 to £500, and then if you have 50k and over, then you can charge, I don't know, £300, £400, £500. But to be completely honest with you, it literally just differs from influencer to influencer. With me, I know that I was very much undercharging, because I always felt really scared to go with what I thought would be okay, for fear of offending or upsetting the brand. So I always kind of try to keep it very minimal.
That's great. I think overall kind of lesson, and I guess to just tie us up, is that feels like a lot more communication and collaboration. There's huge potential for that across the industry, and the more influencers and the more brands can talk about what they want to get and how they can get that together, we'd all be in a much better place. So thank you so much, Steph, and everyone else for joining us. It's been a real delight. There's so many more questions that we didn't get time to go through, so please do email them over to us, and look forward to seeing you all soon at another event.